Hare Krishna, dear devotees. This is your servant Nitai Das. We can begin the Srimad Bhagavatam class with the singing of Jaya Radha Madhava. Unless there is something else, somebody who wants to make any announcement. Okay. All glories to the assembled devotees, Hare Krishna. All glories to the assembled devotees, Hare Krishna. All glories to the merciful, loving grace of Shishi Guru and Gauranga, Shishi Radha Damodar, Shishi Gaur Nitai, Lalita Vishaka. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Hari Bol. So welcome everybody to our Srimad Bhagavatam class. My name is Nitai Das, and I have been given the honor and privilege of presenting Srimad Bhagavatam to you today. We'll be speaking from the 4th canto. It's chapter 25, text 17. And before I begin, we can invoke auspiciousness by chanting Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya together. So, Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So, reading from Canto 4, The Creation of the Fourth Order, Chapter 25, which is entitled The Descriptions of the Characteristics of King Puranjan, and it's text 17. So I'll chant the Sanskrit, and then I'll chant the synonyms, translation, and purport in succession. Puryastu bahyo pavane divyadruma latakule nadadvi hangali kula kola hala jalashaye. Puryastu bahyo pavane divyadruma latakule nadadvi hangali kula kola hala jalashaye. Puryastu bahyo pavane divyadruma latakule nadadvi hangali kula kolahala jalashaye. Purya, of that town. Tu, then. Bahya upavane, in an outside garden. Divya, very nice. Druma, trees. Lata, creepers. Akule, filled with. Nadat, vibrating. Vihanga, birds. Ali, bees. Kula, groups of. Kolahala, humming. Jala ashaye, with a lake. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami, Srila Prabhupada. On the outskirts of that city were many beautiful trees and creepers encircling a nice lake. Also surrounding that lake were many groups of birds and bees that were always chanting and humming. So once again, on the outskirts of that city were many beautiful trees and creepers encircling a nice lake. Also surrounding that lake were many groups of birds and bees that were always chanting and humming. Purport. Since the body is a great city, there must be various arrangements such as lakes and gardens for sense enjoyment. Of the various parts of the body, those which incite sexual impulses are referred to here indirectly. Because the body has genitals, when the living entity attains the right age, be he man or woman, he becomes agitated by the sex impulse. As long as one remains a child, he is not agitated by seeing a beautiful woman. Although the sense organs are present, unless the age is ripe, there is no sex impulse. The favorable conditions surrounding the sex impulse are compared here to a garden or a nice solitary park. When one sees the opposite sex, naturally the sex impulse increases. It is said that if a man in a solitary place does not become agitated upon seeing a woman, he is to be considered a brahmachari. But this practice is almost impossible. The sex impulse is so strong that even by seeing, touching, or talking, coming into contact with, or even thinking of the opposite sex, and even in so many subtle ways, one becomes sexually impelled. Consequently, a brahmachari or sannyasi is prohibited to associate with women, especially in a secret place. The Shastras enjoin that one should not even talk to a woman in a secret place, even if she happens to be one's own daughter, sister, or mother. The sex impulse is so strong that even if one is very learned, he becomes agitated in such circumstances. If this is the case, how can a young man in a nice park remain calm and quiet after seeing a beautiful young woman? The translation once again. On the outskirts of that city were many beautiful trees and creepers encircling a nice lake. Also surrounding that lake were many groups of birds and bees that were always chanting and humming. Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prishtaya Bhutale Prabhupadati Priya Shri Kirirajaya Swamine Subhakta Shastra Vijnana Didasadana Shaline Radha Rasa Biharipyam Bhaktebhyas Chatmadayine Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prishtaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swamini Namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shanyavadi Pashta Deshatarine Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So before I begin, I'd like to offer my humble obeisances to all of you present here on the Zoom platform and whatever other platform this lecture or this talk is being broadcast on. And I'd like to present to everybody Vaishnava Pranam. Vancha kalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhu bhevacha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namah. I humbly entreat everybody assembled here, all the Vaishnavas and Vaishnavis, Shri Radha Damodar, Lalita Vishaka, Shri Gaur Nitai, Srila Prabhupada and the predecessor acharyas, and of course my dear most beloved Gurudev, His Holiness Giriraj Swami, that please bless me that I may speak something of substance on this topic that we are reading and hearing about in the Srimad Bhagavatam. So please be liberal with your blessings. So I'm a visiting devotee, a visiting bhakta, and it just so happens that I've been asked to speak about the birds and the bees. I found that quite funny. But nonetheless, we are discussing Narad Muni's epic allegory, that part of the Bhagavatam where he is preaching to King Prachini Barishad. And he uses this literary device of an allegory to preach to Prachini Barishad to get through to him. When we understand what an allegory is, it helps to more fully appreciate Narad Muni's preaching genius. An allegory is defined as a story, a poem, or a picture that can be interpreted to reveal a hidden meaning, usually a moral or political one. Of course, in this case, it is being used to convey the transcendental knowledge, spiritual knowledge. The Prachetas, the sons of King Prachini Barishad, were engaged in severe austerities. In fact, after receiving special prayers given by Lord Shiva, they resolved to stand in the water and recite those prayers and become self-realized. But in contrast, their father, the king, he was actually involved in immense fruitive activities, sacrifices. He was sacrificing many, many animals. And the purpose of the sacrifices was to enjoy material happiness. He was playing the role of a dutiful householder with wife and sons. And the Karmakanda section of the Vedas were being utilized by him, whereby which he could make sure that his current existence and future existence, either on this planet or in the heavenly planets, would be happy. And so Narad Muni became very merciful. He saw that King Prachinibarishad was simply engaged in materialistic pursuits. So he felt compassion for him, and he appeared on the scene. And immediately he questioned King Prachinibarishad as to the purpose behind the performance of all these vast sacrifices that the king was doing. And he makes a very poignant statement to the king. He says that you're performing these sacrifices, fruitive activities, but by doing so, you will not be able to get rid of the miseries of material life, the threefold miseries, those that are stemming from our own mind and body, those that are coming from other living entities, and those that are coming from natural disturbances, that from the elements governed by higher beings and higher planes. So by performance of any kind of fruitive activity, it does not rid oneself of the threefold material miseries, number one. And number two, it doesn't allow one to enjoy uninterrupted happiness. Whatever happiness that we obtained as a result of our fruitive endeavors is finite. It has a beginning, middle, and end. And the nature of the soul is that it wants to enjoy uninterrupted bliss, Divyananda. And so Narad Muni pointed out these faults, these deficiencies in King Prachinibarishad's performance of sacrifices, his methodology to become happy. And in addition to that, by his mystic potency, Narad Muni was able to give the king a glimpse of his future life. He gave him a vision. And in that vision, the king saw animals that he had killed in sacrifices. They were avenging their injuries and torturing the king. And so the king became very thoughtful. You know, he was following the Vedic process, and he had respectfully honored Saint Narad. And so he became very thoughtful, and he humbly requested Narada to instruct him. And this is the exposition from where Narad begins the epic allegory, the discussion of Puranjan, the city of nine gates, which actually is a allegory for the material body, and specifically in reference to the situation of the king. So instead of speaking to him directly, he uses this poetic device, this literary device, to make his point. So in today's verse, in the subject verse, we have what is described as a beautiful scene. You know, it's a lake with beautiful trees and creepers encircling it. And there's groups of chirping birds and humming bees that are milling about this lake. And in terms of the allegory, it's on the outskirts of the city. And metaphorically, it represents the genitals in the allegory of the body. It's the parts of the body that produce pleasure when excited, when the body comes of age, or when it becomes mature. So there are 5 basic points that I want to convey in this class. And I'll go ahead and briefly mention those, and then we can delve into each one and flesh them out and elaborate on them. The first point is the influence of a place on one's consciousness, on one's psyche. The second point is that the material body expresses sex desire at a certain age and time. The third point is that sex desire is the force that binds us to this material world. The fourth point is that the Vedic prescription to deal with sex desire. And the fifth and final point is the ontological origin of sex desire and the need for bhakti to overcome it. So we can begin with the first point, the influence of a place on one's consciousness. So just as we know the importance of association of people, how that association has an impact on our consciousness, on our psyche, the places that we frequent have a similar effect. It's not too hard to understand. The places where we go, they carry the vibrations of the people that frequent the place and inhabit the place. There is a seminal verse in the Bhagavatam that illustrates the importance of association and how it has a profound impact on our consciousness and on our behavior. This verse is none other than Dhyayato Vishayan Pumsa Sangasteshu Pajayate Sangat Sanjayate Kama Kamat Krodo Bijayate. That when one is contemplating the objects of the senses, the person develops attachment for them, and from such attachment, lust develops, and from lust, anger arises. So just as we may contemplate on an object, whether it be animate or inanimate, and develop an attachment to them, similarly, any place that we become attached to also has an impact on our consciousness. In the subject verse, what's described is a beautiful lake with birds and bees. And when one comes in contact with such beautiful surroundings that are pleasurable to the senses, naturally, the innate propensities for enjoyment increase in the person. If you want to go on a date with a beautiful girl or a handsome young man, you take them to a nice place so that the mind is at ease and so that you can more fully enjoy the company and experience. And when people get married, they go on honeymoons. They don't go on honeymoons to remote places that are full of strife and misery. They go to places like Hawaii or Bali, where there's cool, clear water, sandy beaches, palm trees. The environment is very pleasurable, and that environment has an impact on the consciousness. It allows one, in that case, to exercise, to fully enjoy the potency of the senses. And in contrast to such places that excite the senses, we have places of a spiritual nature. For example, here in Gitanagari, it's situated in a forest. It's an agricultural community. The forest is considered a place of, in the mode of goodness. With an agricultural community with cows. Cows also promote peacefulness and goodness. And so the mind becomes calm, it becomes still. And from that mode of goodness, one can then concentrate on higher spiritual topics, topics relating to our true identity as a soul and not the body. and not become unnecessarily encumbered with trying to gratify the mind and senses. And if anybody has traveled to the holy dhams, Vrindavan and Mayapur, then they are well aware that these places are frequented by saints, that there are mystical places where one can feel the mercy of the Supreme Lord in one's dealings with the locals, with other devotees. And so it can have a very surcharging effect on one's consciousness. So the take-home point there is that the type of place can either stimulate the senses or sublimate the desires that are automatically produced as a result of having a material body. We have a material body, it has certain necessities, it has certain needs, and the type of place can either excite the senses and stimulate those desires, or it can help us to sublimate those desires, depending on what our determination is. So this brings us to the next point, which is that the material body expresses sex desire at a certain age and time. Srila Prabhupada references this point in the purport when he speaks about when the age is ripe. Of course, it's self-evident that, when one is born, this is in the normal course of events, one is born with a genital. In the terms of the allegory, it's one of the 9 gates of the body. And as a child, one is not affected by the itch of sexual desires. We have this very cute baby boy, Jayani, son of Gideon and Lauren. And if we were to put Jayani with an equally cute baby girl, I highly doubt any sparks would fly between them. There is an inherent innocence in the interaction. There's no sexual intent in a baby, because the body has not matured to the point where the sex desire that is dormant in the subtle body will express itself. We know that the body is changing every moment. And the important change that happens in adolescence is that of puberty. There are neuroendocrine functions that take place. The hypothalamus, which is a section in the brain, it releases certain hormones that act on the pituitary gland, and the pituitary gland releases follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone, and those act on the gonads, the testicles and ovaries, and those gonads, those sexual organs, then start producing sex hormones. And it's a very complicated system. There's multiple organs involved, but the result is that the body starts to change. It develops secondary sexual characteristics. The men, the voice deepens, they grow facial hair, more muscle mass. Women, they develop breast tissue. They start menstruating. So these are all changes that happen with the body, a physical transformation that takes place. And in childhood and early youth, when you talk about if you have a boy or a girl and you talk about the opposite sex, they may sneer at you and express disgust, but all of a sudden at the time of puberty, the same person it expresses a natural attraction for a partner. This is all within the natural course of events, because as embodied beings, we're affected by what is happening with the body. And the body at that time starts to specifically express the type of sex desire that has been carried in the subtle body, the mind, intelligence, and ego, because the vehicle through which it can express itself is now mature. And that specific expression of sex desire is created by impressions from this life and previous life, the samskaras that we have embedded in our psyche when it matures. It's important to note that if we were to, for example, remove the genital organs, it wouldn't remove our sexual desire, because the desire is rooted in the subtle body and specifically the mind. Chemical or physical castration, it only inhibits the expression in natural ways. And in fact, it, on some level, may even lead to mental derangement and perversions. And this whole idea of, doing away with, the sexual organs, or in an effort or attempt to rid oneself of sexual desire, is somewhat like the Mayavadi method. The Mayavadis, they say that, my eyes are causing me much distress because I like to see the attractive form, so I'll gouge my eyes out so that I can prevent myself from falling down. The idea is not to do away with the organ, because it's just a vehicle through which what you have inside is being expressed. The solution is to purify that desire through the medium of bhakti. So this brings me to the next point, which is that sex desire binds us to the material world. I bring up this point about Mayavad and controlling sex desire because we find in most religious processes and spiritual thought, there is a push, there is a need to control, to regulate one's sex desire. And the Vedic conception, our philosophy, also asserts the same point, that sex desire is the highest grade of material pleasure. It's derived from the contact of the senses with their objects, and the enjoyment that results from that contact shackles the soul to seek this type of pleasure. You could say perpetually, because we have been in the material world for a very long time, and we have been experiencing this form of pleasure in innumerable life forms and innumerable bodies. And this is, in fact, the grossest weapon of the external energy, the deluding energy of Krishna, that it shackles us to this body and this bodily conception. And what to speak of human beings and demigods, even the greatest of living entities within this universe are shackled by desire. I'd like to discuss three personalities: Lord Brahma, Lord Shiva, and a great, powerful Muni mystic, Vishwamitra, to illustrate this point, that most, if not all, embodied beings are shackled by sex desire. So Lord Brahma, he is the first progenitor, the creator of this universe, the architect and engineer, the most intelligent personality. And in the process of creation, he became attracted to his daughter. And at that time, there were 6 sons of Marichi, 6 demigods, that saw Brahma becoming impelled by lust for his created daughter. Because everybody is a son or daughter of Brahma. He is the first living entity. So he became enamored with his own creation in the female form. And these personalities, the sons of Marichi, looked upon Brahma with abhorrence. And as a result of their offense, they were cursed to take birth as the sons of Hiranyakashipu, and subsequently as the sons of Devaki, who were killed in one after another in succession by Kamsa. So if Lord Brahma can become affected by sex desire, what to speak of all of us? Lord Shiva, he became bewildered by Mohini Murti. Shiva is the most auspicious one, the topmost Vaishnava. He is constantly sitting in meditation on his Ishtadev, Lord Ramachandra. But he actually desired to see his worshipful Lord in the form of Mohini Murti. And when the Lord granted his wish, he became completely captivated by the external energy of the Lord. And in the presence of his wife Bhavani, started chasing after Mohini Murti. But the Lord is very kind. Shiva is a great devotee, and so by the mercy of the Lord, he then regained his composure by the Lord's grace. And finally, we have Vishwamitra Muni and the celestial courtesan Menaka. Vishwamitra Muni was engaged in severe austerities. And as is usually the case, when a personality gains some progress in performance of severe austerities, it seems that Indra becomes insecure. He thinks that such a person is going to usurp his throne, his position. And so Indra sends, in this case, the celestial courtesan Menaka to seduce the Muni and to detract him from performance of his austerities. And as a result of her advances, the Muni falls prey, and that results in the birth of a daughter. There's many, many examples in our Shastra of personalities that are endeavoring to control their senses, but become bewildered by this external energy, by the sex desire. In fact, Srila Prabhupada says that the entire material world is moving under the spell of sex desire. And there was one instance, a conversation that took place between Srila Prabhupada and an Indian gentleman who was visiting Srila Prabhupada, actually, whose house Srila Prabhupada was visiting. And the gentleman was introducing all of his relatives and children one after another. And it came to a point, because it kept going on, and it came to a point where Srila Prabhupada turned to his disciple and said that the man was just simply glorifying his sex life. So this sex desire and sex life is something that most religions, most spiritual processes, they try to curb, they try to transcend or overcome. And this is evident in many, many verses of the Srimad Bhagavatam, but one which is striking, one which stands out, is spoken by Lord Rishabdev to his 100 sons headed by Bharat. Lord Rishabdev says, Pumsa striya mithuni bhavam etam tayor mitho hridaya grantim ahu ato griha kshetra sutapta vittar janasya moha yam aham mameti. That the attraction between the male and the female is a basic principle of material existence. On the basis of this misconception, which ties together the hearts of the male and female. One becomes attracted to his body, home, property, children, relatives, and wealth. In this way, one increases life's illusions and thinks in terms of I and mine. So this idea that I am the body, and when I am paired with a partner of my choice, I'll become happy. You know, I'll live in a home and have children and wealth and relatives, and my life will be complete. This is actually, it's a fallacy. Our true happiness is something beyond this. This is a temporary pleasure. And so the initial purpose of our yogic process, and any true yogic process, is to rise above this gross bodily and subtle mental platform and understanding, come to the understanding of the qualitative oneness of spirit that exists between all of us, which is a prerequisite before we can actually enter into the realm of bhakti. So this brings me to point 4, which is the Vedic prescription to deal with sex desire. So understanding the extraordinary power of the external energy, and out of a healthy respect for it, the ancient sages and seers, they formulated a social system whereby which an individual could exercise his sex impulse in a socially constructive way, and not forfeit his chance of making spiritual progress, which actually can't be made in other life forms. We can experience sex life in any one of the 8,400,000 species, but to make spiritual progress, to have the requisite intelligence and reasoning faculty, is only present in the human form. So the ancient sages and seers understood this, and therefore they have instituted the varnashram system so that one would not become implicated in karmic bondage that would result from unrestrained sense gratification. So the varnashram system, and specifically here we're speaking about the ashram system, is comprised of 4 stages in life, and I'll run through those. We all have some familiarity with it, but it's good to hear it. The first 25, so life is, you can say, it's estimated to be 100 years, at least in Kali Yuga. And there's 4 phases of life. There's the Brahmacari phase, the Grihastha phase, the Vanaprastha phase, and finally sannyas. So the Brahmacari phase, the first phase of life, or from ages 0 to 25, is considered student life, where one is celibate and one lives under and in service to the guru. One may take up a vocation. But the main purpose of the Brahmacari phase is development of character and learning how to control the senses. And not all persons who are in the Brahmacari phase of life continue to be Brahmacharis. If one wants to have a family, one wants to engage in sex life, then they're given permission to enter into the Grihastha phase, which is supposed to be from ages 25 to 50, and that's married life. And in that phase of life, one has regulated sex life for procreation, to give rise to spiritually conscious, Krishna conscious progeny. And it's not just a license for unrestricted sense gratification, unrestricted sex. It's actually, one is accepting family and social responsibilities. It's a phase of extraordinary responsibility. one has to not only care for their family, but society as well, and support the other three ashrams, the Brahmacari ashram, the Vanaprastha ashram, and the Sannyas ashram. So then that brings us to the next phase, which is Vanaprastha, which is 75 or 50 to 75, you can say. And this is retired life, where again, one resumes a life of celibacy. They focus on performing austerities to cultivate detachment from the hearth and home. So becoming more and more detached from material affairs, so that ultimately one can take to sannyas, which is from ages 75 to 100, renounced life, where one is a celibate also, but committed to serving divinity, to Krishna, and the mission with body, mind, and words in full surrender. So this is the social system devised by the Vedic conception, specifically the ancient sages and seers. But we find in Kali Yuga that in our modern day world, it is, as Srila Prabhupada says, almost impossible to satisfactorily practice true brahmacharya. It's an unfortunate consequence of the world we live in today. There's some reasons for that, you know. There's no training from youth to control one's senses. We are brought up in a culture that expresses wanton hedonism and consumerism. The authorities, the scientists, the philosophers, the intelligentsia are not interested in safeguarding our human form of life. They're more interested in making money and using human capital to make money. They're advancing a hedonistic agenda. You know, science saying that there is no soul and it doesn't matter, there is no afterlife and there is no karma, means you can do whatever you want. And on an individual level also, you know, there's more and more exposure and access to lascivious content in media and books and movies. And so without the proper training of, or institutional support and training, it's very hard to maintain brahmacharya. And if one is not maintained or cultivated true brahmacharya, it has an impact on one's grihastha ashram, vanaprastha ashram, and sannyas ashram. But it's not that one should lose heart. Celibacy and brahmacharya are important aspects of spiritual culture. One should learn how to perform austerities and endeavor to do them well. One should perform the prescribed duties of their ashram with a full heart. But doing so, one does not, in and of itself, does not attract the attention of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. You know, Krishna is not interested in our, only in our performance of our ashram duties or in performance of brahmacharya. He's looking for our love. The Vedic conception, the social system, is meant to help one come to the mode of goodness. And at that point, one can then fully delve into bhakti without any hindrance. But we try our best, and we leave the rest to Krishna. So this brings me to the final point, the ontological origin of sex desire and the need for bhakti. So it should be quite evident by this point in the talk that our sex desire is something that is produced or that is inherent in our subtle body and is manifested at a specific point in time by the gross body. And it can't be abolished or eliminated. This idea that, you know, I'm going to give it up because I want to give it up. One can be determined, but it is very difficult because it is a function of the external energy. And we are extraordinarily small. The individual soul is anu atma, is infinitesimal. And the material energy is compared to either a vast ocean or a blazing forest fire. And so it is not that it is such an easy thing to do. Some would argue that it's nearly impossible, but it can be overcome through regulation. We find that by performing ashram duties sincerely and genuinely, by following the instructions given by Guru, by surrender to the Guru and surrender to Krishna, then these vices that are present within us can be overcome. And one can reach the stage where one is not disturbed by the incessant flow of material desires, that it becomes a situation like rivers flowing into the ocean, which is constantly being filled but remains still. We can come to this platform. And we can't get rid of desires, because desires are a function of the body, but we can become peaceful if we reach this platform where we become undisturbed. So sex desire has to be purified, and it's purified through proper execution of our ashram duties. And ultimately, it is expressed in its original state. And this brings me to the point about the ontology of sex desire, which is that it is a perverted reflection of the Adi Ras. So the Adi Ras is the natural attraction between man and woman. And it is found in all species, but it is found in its pure form, also in the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And so it's not something that we can eliminate. And this Adi Ras, this pure sex psychology, is exemplified in the mellow of conjugal love between Krishna and Radha. There's a gulf of difference between the loving dealings of Radha and Krishna and any mundane man and woman. And the difference is like that between gold and iron. So it's not the same thing, but we can understand that what we are experiencing or what we're trying to do is a perverted reflection of that original love. In the purport to the first canto, first chapter, first verse, Srila Vishwamitra Chakravarti Thakur specifically deals with this original and pure sex psychology, and he states that it is devoid of all mundane inebriety, and its reality is experienced in the spiritual world. So how can we get from where we are to where that is? So in order to gain entrance into the higher reality of bhakti, we have to engage wholeheartedly in the practice and the 9 processes of bhakti, starting with Shravanam, Kirtanam, and have enthusiasm, faith, and patience, and ultimately depend on the mercy of Krishna. This is the path of bhakti. It's a path of surrender. It's a path of dependence. And we are under the merciful shelter of Radha Damodar, and there's a beautiful pastime, or beautiful point from the Damodar Leela pastime, in which we find that Mother Jashoda, who was trying to bind baby Krishna with a rope, found that it was always 2 finger breadths too short. So the acharyas explained that the one breath is the purushartha, is the endeavor of the spiritual aspirant, and the other finger breath is the mercy of the divine. So it takes both. So if we do our part, if we engage in the process with a full heart, then Krishna's mercy will come. And what seems to be extraordinarily difficult to extricate from our heart, to eradicate from our heart, will naturally float away. I'd like to conclude by reading about, or I'd like to speak about and then read a very, very important verse from the Bhagavad Gita, since this is Gita Nagari, and we are living by the principles of the Gita, that deals specifically with this issue of sex desire. In our conditioned state, we are plagued by gross sex desire, and that is experienced through the mirror of the mind. And so a pivotal point here is that the mind has to be gradually subdued by our practice of Krishna consciousness in a detached mood. And so in reference to that, Sri Krishna, in the 6th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, Dhyana Yoga, he says, Ashamshayam mahabaho mano durnigraham chalam abhyasena tu kaunteya vairagyena chagriyate. Lord Sri Krishna said, O mighty armed son of Kunti, it is undoubtedly very difficult to curb the restless mind, but it is possible by suitable practice and detachment. And in the purport, Srila Prabhupada completely encapsulates the entire process of bhakti. It's very beautifully written, and I think it is very relevant to this point of dealing with anarthas and dealing with the sex impulse and sex desire. He states, the difficulty of controlling the obstinate mind as expressed by Arjuna is accepted by the personality of Godhead. But at the same time, he suggests that by practice and detachment, it is possible. What is that practice? In the present age, no one can observe the strict rules and regulations of placing oneself in a sacred place, focusing the mind on the supersoul, restraining the senses and the mind, observing celibacy or brahmacharya, remaining alone, etc. By the practice of Krishna consciousness, however, one engages in the 9 types of devotional service to the Lord. The first and foremost of such devotional engagements is hearing about Krishna. This is a very powerful transcendental method for purging the mind of all misgivings. The more one hears about Krishna, the more one becomes enlightened and detached from everything that draws the mind away from Krishna. By detaching the mind from activities not devoted to the Lord, one can very easily learn vairagya. Vairagya means detachment from matter and engagement of the mind and spirit. Impersonal spiritual detachment is more difficult than attaching the mind to the activities of Krishna. This is practical because by hearing about Krishna, one becomes automatically attached to the Supreme Spirit. This attachment is called parishanubhava, spiritual satisfaction. It is just like the feeling of satisfaction a hungry man has for every morsel of food he eats. The more one eats while hungry, the more one feels satisfaction and strength. Similarly, by discharge of devotional service, one feels transcendental satisfaction as the mind becomes detached from the material objectives. It is something like curing a disease by expert treatment and appropriate diet. Hearing of the transcendental activities of Lord Krishna is therefore expert treatment for the mad mind, and eating the foodstuffs offered to Krishna is the appropriate diet for the suffering patient. This treatment is the process of Krishna consciousness. So thank you for your kind attention, Hare Krishna. We can take any comments, questions, or critiques at this time.
Thank you so much for your class, Prabhu. It's so nice to hear from you. And yeah, I think this is a very important topic in Bhakti, because so many people think about spiritual life as yeah, that I grow up in a Buddhist family, so for them practicing spiritual, I mean, you're gonna become a monk and you're not gonna get married, and parents are afraid of that. So so I think it's a very important topic in spiritual life, especially in Bhakti. And I like the last point when you were talking about, when you were reading in the Bhagavad Gita about constantly hearing about Krishna. And so I was wondering that when you start a family life and you have family responsibilities and things like that, so how do you maintain the consciousness of always being able to remain with Krishna? Because you may not be able to hear Krishna Katha because you will have to work and take care of family, and so how do you maintain your practice when you have a family? How is that possible? Because like from someone who had no experience, it seems very daunting. It's like, as soon as I enter family life, I will have zero time for my hearing. I will try my best to chant, but sometimes my chanting is not going to be even good. How am I going to do that? It seems very daunting. Yeah.
Right. So it is more difficult to do when you take up the grihastha ashram, you take up a family life, and you have your spouse to take care of and potentially some children also. But this is why proper training is required before you enter into family life, where you understand the importance of sadhana, a solid spiritual practice, the importance of waking up early and performing your japa, daily reading, so you can carry that over when you decide, or if you decide to enter into a grihastha situation. And even then, it's still difficult to do because you have many more responsibilities, but you have to find time. You have to find time to do it. You know, I personally, I don't live in the temple. I live outside, and I have a full-time job, and I have to wake up earlier, and I have to chant. And I notice that if I chant and if I read before going into work, I have a much better experience with the day. You know, so it takes determination, it takes more effort, it takes planning. You may also have to compromise with your personal recreation time, you know, something you like to do. You know, you may have to relegate that, or it may have to take a second priority, but you'll appreciate it when you feel the difference. You know, our process is one of practice and one of appreciation. We understand, for whatever actions we do, we are understanding that we're getting a reciprocation from that. You know, so you know, when you go to the temple and you go to the morning program and you're engaging in your duties as a temple devotee, or even when you're chanting the Hare Krishna Mahamantra for years on end, people don't do that simply because they are programmed to. They're doing it because they are getting some reciprocation. And so it's the same situation. Krishna will put you in a situation, but you know, and there will be tests, but it's not that it's impossible to rise to the occasion. You know, you can rise to the occasion. You can put your best foot forward and pass the test, and then you'll feel the internal reciprocation. You know, coming from the guru, or coming from devotees, or coming from just within. So to answer your question, I guess in a couple words, is it is difficult, but if one is determined, one can make the time. And then one will be benefited too. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you so much, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna.
I'm still curious. So, what kind of tests? How does that look like?
So, in terms of tests, what I mean is, we may have responsibilities that may appear material, right? That may appear separate from, full-fledged engagement in bhakti, right? But we shouldn't try to see those as separate, first of all, right? We should see that as something we do that is giving support to our practice of bhakti, right? If we are in a marriage situation, we can try to incorporate Krishna consciousness in that situation, right? Instead of seeing that as something that is separate, something that is to be abandoned, so that can also, this psychology can be a test too, dealing with the psychology that, I have a partner or a spouse that doesn't want to be Krishna conscious, and so I should give him or her up, or, I have to take care of the child, but I have all my rounds to chant. And so, the child will take second priority. Like there shouldn't be this natural tension, that is what I mean by tests. And then, living in the material world, having, making a marriage work, having children, that in of itself is a difficult thing to do nowadays. It's also a test. There's so many issues that come up between people that are living together, and dealing with children. And as children grow up, they have their own sets of issues. So, if one is grounded and one is practicing Krishna consciousness and trying to give that to their family, or if by Krishna's grace, all the members are cohesively practicing Krishna consciousness together, it can be a very uplifting and beneficial experience. And it provides protection.
Thank you so much, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Does anybody else have Agari Krishna Prabhu?
Hare Krishna Prabhu.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you so much for that very measured and comprehensive presentation on this existential point of material existence, sex desire. It was a real intellectual treat for me, so thank you. So my question relates to Adirat. So in the third canto, Lord Kapila, he tells his mother that one of the creative impetuses in the primary creation is the sex energy of the Lord. So there's the Kala Shakti and also the sex energy. So God in general, or even Krishna as well, persons who are not familiar with his multifarious energies accuse them of not being compassionate, because we see that the sex energy is very destructive. So even though it causes unification, but it also causes destruction. And right now, so many devotees in Europe are experiencing just one person's subtle sex energy in the form of profit, adoration, and distinction by conquering another nation. But could you argue that it's actually the compassion of the Lord? So in other words, by the Lord injecting the Adirat, he essentially creates a hierarchy of the yoga system. So only bhakti, only a process that actually deals with the seed of the Adirat in the heart will actually facilitate complete liberation for the living entity. Other processes such as Jnana, Ashtanga, and Karmakanda, they don't deal with the seed, and therefore they are necessarily lower than Bhakti. So could one make that argument into defending the Lord and this feature of the creation, that by the Lord injecting the sex energy, he not only reveals what's going on in the spiritual world, because the Adiras, even though it's the lowest in the material world, it's actually the highest in the spiritual world in terms of Parakiya Rasa. So it reveals that feature of the spiritual world, and it also establishes the supremacy of Bhakti in both the material and the spiritual world.
It's true that in Jnanamarg and Dhyanamārg, one has to completely renounce, the material expression of this Adi Ras, or the perverted reflection of Adi Ras. But in the Bhakti process, one can actually engage in the Grihastha ashram, but ultimately one can transcend it because the cult of Bhakti is so powerful, right? But this Adi Ras itself, Srila Prabhupada states, is indicative of dualism, right? That there is the enjoyer and the enjoyed, right? And so we don't find that in Jnanamarg, because Jnanamarg, the ultimate perfection is to merge into the spiritual oneness, right? There is no there is no reciprocation, there is no two, there's only one, right? But this I think that, I mean, if I'm understanding your point correctly, it seems that it's only through the medium of bhakti that one can actually come to this understanding of Parakiya Bhav, the mellow of conjugal love, and actually experience that when one becomes realized, right? You can't experience that through jnana, you can't experience that through karma, right? It's only through bhakti. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does, because it's an argument that I would like to make in defending, the Lord. So yeah, thank you, Prabhu.
Yeah, I guess I can say it a different way. I mean, first of all, the Adi Ras conception argues in favor of a dual or non-impersonal conception. And number two, it's only through the medium of bhakti that one can actually appreciate the Adi Ras in the pure sex psychology in its true form in divinity. So in the conjugal mellow between Radha and Krishna. Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Prabhu.
Sure. Is there anybody else who would like to say anything? I think there is one comment on the chat. I can open that up if nobody else has anything to say.
I'd just like to say Hare Krishna. Thank you, Prabhu, for your class.
Hare Krishna. Thank you, Prabhu.
Yeah, thank you for all the points you made, and even sharing your experience that sometimes in the morning you just have to, get up and chant and read before you go to work, but that improves the quality of your day so much.
Sure, absolutely.
I think I can agree with that. It's hard sometimes, but as long as you get it done in the morning, it really improves the quality of your day.
Sure. Okay, thank you. So I think that is it. So we can conclude by chanting Vaishnava Pranam. So all together. Vancha kalpa tarubhyascha kripa sindhu vevacha patitanam
pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo
namo. Hare Krishna. Have a wonderful day, and Jai Srila Prabhupada.
Thank you, Prabhu. Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hey, Prabhu.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Prabhu. Hare Krishna. Thank you so much.
Thank you.